Hi to all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Parenting Playbook with Maureen and Kyle here on Fox 8 CLE+. The past few episodes, we've talked about mental health for kids. And the key to mental health is typically, one of the key factors is a good self-esteem. And there are ways to boost self-esteem no matter what age your child is, but it looks a little differently depending on their age and the phase that they're in. I want to give you some statistics here. Stats show that a significant decline in self-esteem from childhood to high school. 80% of first graders score high on self-esteem. They feel great about themselves. That's compared to 5% of high school graduates. Low self-esteem is also associated with higher rates of negative behaviors such as bullying and self-harm, especially among girls. So it's very important that we pay attention to self-esteem at every age and every phase. And I'm bringing in an expert today, one of my favorite child psychologists to talk to, Dr. Tori Cordiano. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love getting to talk to you.
Now, I do want to let everybody know, too, you are embedded with Laurel School, which I think is just so cool because you get to be hands-on, especially with, as I threw out that statistic, with girls. And I know boys have the same issues, but a lot of focus is on girls sometimes with self-esteem. So are you feeling, when I say those statistics, is this what you're living day in and day out?
Yeah. Well, I think it does have being in an all-girls school, K-12 all-girls, it does give a great window into what typical development looks like over the lifespan throughout those school years. And seeing what some of those unique challenges are for girls, but also some of the unique ways that we can work with girls and, boost self-esteem, boost their sense of purpose, strengthen resilience, all those things that go into well-being.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I want to ask just right off the bat, since we kind of alluded to it, how key is self-esteem for a child's overall development into adulthood?
Yeah. It's pretty core. I think it's at that central piece when we think about your sense of self, your belief that you have value in the world, just for being you, that there are people who value you. It's a pretty central component to our overall well-being, our mental health, even things like our physical health can be connected to our sense of self-worth and our self-esteem.
And I have to imagine over the past few years, self-esteem has probably, and confidence, I want to say self-esteem, confidence, all of these things have probably taken a hit thanks to technology, social media. It's a conversation that we're having all the time. Is that something that you've been taking a look at and that you notice?
Yeah, and I think, the data will bear this out. We're too close, actually, to some of these newer developments in technology to see what this looks like over the course of development. But one thing that you said in the intro that struck me is that we see this decline in self-esteem from first grade through 12th grade. And part of that is the piece that we really want to pay attention to. What is tanking self-esteem for kids? Where are the places that we want to intervene? But there's another part of it that's important to acknowledge that is a natural decline in self-esteem from early childhood, 5, 6, 7 years old, the kind of natural decline that we have seen for generations when it comes to development. And that comes from looking around you. If you talk to a first grader, they're going to go to the Olympics and be the president and go to the moon, and they have no limit to what they think they can accomplish. And by the time they hit 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they've come down to earth a little bit. They're doing a little bit more accurate comparison. And we do see a developmentally typical dip in self-esteem in those middle to late childhood years.
Okay. Well, as a parent, then as you're saying this, I'm just thinking if we establish a good foundation, like in those toddler years and as they're really developing, does that help maybe not make that decline so extreme as they get older?
Absolutely. And we think of self-esteem as sort of this inward-facing concept, but really it is grounded from birth in our relationships with other people. So those initial early relationships with parents and caregivers, and once kids are in school, the relationships they have with their teachers and their classmates and their teammates, all of this can help to strengthen their sense of self and their sense of connectedness to the world around them.
So let's go ages and phases at this point, just in case we have some parents of young kids that are thinking, okay, what do I need to do? So let's start with the youngest group. What is it that builds self-esteem for the kids when they are maybe, born, birth to 5, or maybe we can take it all the way up to school age too. But those early years, what's key in boosting self-esteem?
So these are the time where you are the central, if you are the caregiver, the parent, you are the central person in your baby, toddler, preschooler's life. And it gives you a lot of power actually to shape what those interactions look like. So those times when you are connected with your child, and this is not going to be 12 hours a day, 24 hours a day. This is, some of the time when we are in those connections with them, that we are making eye contact, we are mimicking their facial expressions. We're listening to what they have to say. We're giving them our undivided attention for a chunk of time. And this doesn't have to be anything special or grandiose. This can be when we're playing on the floor. It can be when we're walking through the grocery store, that we are really taking the time to have those back and forth connected interactions with them. That's a big piece of starting to shape self-esteem and that sense of connectedness from a young age.
I know a lot of parents also want to know some of those key phrases that can help at that young age, and I've heard different things over the years, where it's like you praise the effort, you say good job. So what is it that we're focusing on when they're young and they're really, really starting to evolve in the world?
Yeah, yeah. And I think as generally, I tend not to be super prescriptive in my, what I tell parents, say this, not this. That's not really my vibe and how I work with families, because I think we can kind of get in our heads about there's some perfect thing that we're supposed to say, and there's not. But generally, what we're thinking about, and this transcends over the lifespan. This is for your 4-year-old, this is for your 10-year-old, this is for your 16-year-old, that you are focusing on their growth, you're focusing on their effort, you're focusing on how they feel about their accomplishments and the work that they're putting in. And that can be something like, with your 3 or 4-year-old, as they're learning to dress themselves and do their, bathroom jobs and get themselves downstairs, that you're saying, oh, that must feel so good to take care of yourself. And now we're ready to have breakfast together. And you don't need to lay it on too thick and you don't need to do it all the time, but it's just that connecting it back to how does that feel inside you when you are doing these things that give you this sense of pride or accomplishment.
So that's what we're pointing out to them is sort of like, how did you feel after you accomplished this certain task?
Right. You can ask it as a question. You can even say it as, oh, I bet that feels good. Oh, I bet you feel good that you can tie your shoes now. Right. And it's just this little comment that you don't need to do anything else with it. It doesn't need to happen all the time, but it places it back on them as opposed to, I am sort of like passing judgment, good, bad, or otherwise, on this accomplishment that you have made. When we think about self-esteem, it is this sense of self inside of you that I feel value. I feel I have, this sense of self-worth, and there's an intrinsic piece to that.
I'm so glad that you even started that part of the conversation saying that you're not big on don't say this and say that, because I want to kind of go back to that only because I know so many people, and I've thought it myself, where I'm thinking, and maybe this is maybe for the older kids, but oh gosh, did I say something that hurt their self-esteem?
Yeah.
And I'm worried, I shouldn't have said, like, I don't know, what were you thinking? Things like that just kind of naturally come out. So should we be beating ourselves up if that does happen? I mean, is there something that we really should not be saying, even though you said that it's not prescriptive?
Sure.
I do want to address that because it is a thought that goes through our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few parts to this. The first is that we want to give ourselves a lot of grace as parents, that we are humans, we are not robots. Things are going to come out of our mouth that we regret, right? And it could be like, what were you thinking when they forget the test or the homework or the water bottle for the 10th day in a row? But the power that we have there to do some repair and to do some acknowledgement later on of, I really stepped in it. I came on way too strong. I raised my voice. I was really unkind, whatever you need to address. And then to think about, here's how I'm going to handle that differently next time. I need to take a breath before we start that conversation. So that's the repair piece. It is true, though, that if you are noticing these consistent patterns with your kid, that you're coming in hot and you're coming in with this strong response, and it's resulting in frequently needing to go back to this, like, okay, let's revisit that, then it's worth thinking about, like, what's getting in the way here? And how can I come to this with a reminder of what my goal is in this situation? It's not to shame my child. It's not to make them feel bad. It is sometimes to help connect the dots between actions and consequences, and that's part of our job as parents. But there's ways to do that and to address it in a way that supports self-esteem as opposed to a way that tears them down.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We did just do an episode on mom rage and how to like internally take a look and go, is this me? And how do I repair that with my kids? Because this is all connected. It's all connected with you know, how we're interacting with them, and we don't want to hurt their feelings and have them go, well, I must be a bad kid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are some of the conversations that you think parents can have along the way? Maybe, again, we'll kind of focus younger kids to maybe early middle school. What are some of those conversations that you can have maybe in the car that consistently come back to building confidence and self-esteem?
One of the big things, and we see this from a young age, but really we can start to take hold, I would say like 8 and up, is to be having conversations where you are actually interested in what your child has to say about a topic. You know, if they are bringing up something that happens at school or a song that they like or don't like, that you are actually giving that the same consideration as you would if you were having a conversation with a peer. And obviously the conversation looks different, but it's like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Like, what is it that you like about that? Or, oh, okay, what made you upset about how that went down today? And not just kind of mining for the information that we sometimes do as parents, but really being open to like, I haven't thought about it that way. And the cool part about that is when we start to have those conversations, we do get to see our kids in this different light, that their brains are not our brains. Their experiences are not our experiences. So they can share things with us that might actually cause us to think about something in a different way or shift our perspective. And that's a powerful thing for them to witness.
Again, sticking with the younger group, and I feel like after we take a commercial break, we'll move on to like high schoolers, because I feel like that is a totally different realm. But sticking with the younger kids, I'm going to throw out an example here of, I always am trying to think of, I'm stumbling around as a parent of what do I do in this situation. So let's pick on my middle for a second, because I don't think she's going to watch this show. And if she does, I will skip through this part. She is a horrible soccer player. Like she's on the field and she is there watching the other kids play. But then when those teams came out, she's on not even the B team. She made like the C team, and the tears start flowing. And she looks at me and she goes, I'm on the C team. I'm on the worst team. And I've never even scored a goal. You know, I'm like, yep, that's probably why you're on the C team. But, you know, in those moments, I know I'm not the only one who's had a child who kind of knows where their weaknesses are. And I can't sit there and lie to her and say, well, you're the best soccer player. You know, like, how are we handling those situations where they're starting to notice where they need improvement, or their confidence is low in a certain area, whether it's homework, sports, friendship. How do we handle that?
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned you can't just lie and say like, oh, you're the best, because sometimes our instinct as a parent is to say like, they got it wrong and the coach made a mistake. And, it's a natural instinct, excuse me, it's a natural instinct to have. But if we can pause and just actually be with them in that moment, and there's like the initial comforting phase. This is the team's come out, she's in tears. And here we're just doing a lot of rubbing the back and kind of reassuring noises and like, oh, that stinks. I'm so sorry it worked out that way. And, just getting through that piece of it. Then there's a follow-up conversation that you may have that gets more at the root of how do you feel about this? And is this something that if you place a lot of value on this, if you love this sport, if you love this activity, is it a place where maybe you want to put in a little bit more work? And, if we look at some of those girls that are on the A team, maybe they're doing more practices, maybe they're doing more foot skills, and maybe that's kind of what you're interested in, but maybe it's not. And it's okay to have things. And, if your love is somewhere else and you do this because it's fun, then we can think about like, what's fun about being on the C team? You get to be with your friends, you get to be playing a sport that you like, you're improving, you're maybe winning some games because you're playing with kids that are closer to your level. So there's different ways to approach that conversation depending on what their goals are.
I love it. Let's take a quick break, but I do want to ask, those high school years can get so tricky, and that's when we start to get into comparison. So we'll take a quick break, then we're going to be back with Tori to talk about those tricky years. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Parenting Playbook with Maureen Kyle. We are talking about your kids' self-esteem, how to keep it boosted throughout their life, how to make sure that you are promoting healthy confidence at all ages. We were just delving deep into the younger years, but now I really want to focus on those tricky high school years because that's when we start to see a lot of peer influence. And our expert today, Dr. Tori Cordiano, child psychologist, thank you so much for being with us. I was loving what you were saying about the younger kids, but I know that we could talk forever about those teenage years and those. I even want to lump in like late, like junior high and high school, because as we kind of mentioned before, that's when we're starting to see maybe some social media use. And I know that as I've talked to a lot of parents, then that starts to be the comparison years. How tricky is it with those age groups to keep self-esteem boosted?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think, we want to normalize the kind of ups and downs that come, especially in those adolescent years and those early adolescent years into the beginning of high school for sure. Those are times, if we look at like a trajectory, we can see those dips in self-esteem. And again, they're pretty typical, though very hard to witness as parents. But if we think about the things that support kids at this stage of life, the healthy relationships, the need for that does not go away. So here, the difference is more of that may be driven by peer relationships than when they were younger, but it can also still be parent relationships, coach relationships, relatives, siblings, peers. Those are sources of strong self-esteem. The other thing that really comes into play, so I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
The other thing, there we go. The other thing that really comes into play at this age is feeling a sense of worth and usefulness outside of yourself. So if you have some purpose, some place that you are putting your time, your energy, and this could be babysitting younger siblings, this could be volunteering at your church, this could be helping with a basketball on the weekends. It doesn't have to be one specific thing, and it actually helps if it meets where a child's interest and their level of maybe skill or some expertise that they have, something that they're interested in, that they have a chance to give back or to work in some way that is bigger than themselves. That is a huge marker and a helper to building self-esteem.
That's so interesting. So nothing that is self-centered, not like, oh, I'm going to work. We were just talking about soccer, not like, oh, I'm going to go work at soccer. This is like volunteering within the community. That's where we should be looking for opportunities.
Yes, and this is a really nice balance. Adolescents inherently are pretty self-centered and not in a bad way. Developmentally, they're turned pretty inward. And to balance that out with things that are bigger than themselves. So it could even be like volunteering or a club at school that they are a part of, things that just give them some sense of connectedness, community, and they have some contribution that they can feel some value from.
Interesting. Now, there is an instance that I know I'm not alone in this because I've had multiple conversations with multiple parents, especially of girls. Again, I have girls, so this is where my experience is. But Tori, since you have a son too, like maybe you can weigh in on this. But at a younger age, I didn't really expect, even before, maybe she was 10, let's say 10 at the most. I did see some of that comparison, physical comparison, start to come in. I started to see my daughter stand in the mirror and suck in her stomach and talk about how she looked and those appearances. And I know I'm not alone because I've had this conversation with a lot of other parents who said, I noticed that too, around that age. How do we handle I never mentioned anything. I'm very careful about what I say at home, but it just through peers and through whatever they're ingesting, they start to look at themselves and start to point out what they view as flaws. How do we coach them through that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to take a quick second and say it's not just girls, right? So I think historically this has sort of been described as an issue that faces girls more than boys. And that's actually not at all the case. Boys may internalize this in different ways, but there's still that comparison going on. I think first we want to notice what our instinct is, right? So sometimes there is that instinct to reassure and to say, no, you're beautiful, no, you're perfect. And of course, we understand where that comes from, but we really want to start with hearing what our kids are saying if they're willing to share it with us. So if they are, you're noticing them making comments about their bodies or comparing themselves to other people or spending a lot of time analyzing or tweaking themselves in the mirror, that we're saying, tell me what this is about. What are you noticing? And really trying to be curious to give them the space to say what they are experiencing experiencing. And then we can address it from a standpoint of, thinking about what your body does to help you, how your body is strong and capable. But we're not going overboard on the reassurance because we do actually want to hold some space for the hard feelings that they are having. And then to think about what helps you feel better and what helps you feel worse. So I might feel really good after a hard soccer practice. I helped my team, I ran, I could see strong my legs are. That feels really good. I might not feel really good after I spend the same amount of time scrolling Instagram and looking at these curated pictures that make me question what my body should look like. And as kids get a little bit older, they can have that piece of self-reflection of what are the things that help you feel better in this space and what are the things that tear you down.
Should we be having that conversation even younger? I ask only because one time my daughter, when she was 11, said that she felt bad because she's not on Instagram. I'm trying to think of what she was even looking at. Maybe it was YouTube. She saw somebody had a sweatshirt that she wanted and she felt bad that she didn't have that sweatshirt. So, I mean, that was like age 11, she started to recognize those feelings. So are we having those conversations earlier and earlier and pointing out like, hey, you might start to feel this way?
Yeah, yeah, and that emotion, whether it's envy or jealousy, comparison, those are hard emotions. So, the fact that she's willing to have that conversation, we first start by normalizing like, oh, that's such a hard feeling to have. And, I have that as a parent sometimes. And you can even give examples that it can be we can be quick to point to, what do you mean? Look at all those sweatshirts you have in your closet and to go that route, but to actually just hold a little space for, yeah, it's really hard when somebody has something that we want or is accomplishing something that we really want to have for ourselves. That's a hard place to be. And just starting with kind of naming it and leaving some space often gives us a good sense of where we want to go next.
When it's coming from peers, when it is that, maybe there's a structure at school for boys and girls where kids have something or kids are teasing and it's outside of our realm, outside of our family, outside of our house. How do we know that our kids are struggling with that if they're not speaking to us? Because that's another thing. Sometimes they are not open about this. So like, how do we tell that maybe they're feeling some outside stressors and pressure for comparison and not feeling great about themselves?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we're looking for if our kids are not talking about it openly, which is sometimes the case, is any big shift that we see in their mood, in their demeanor, in their interest, in their activities. We know developmentally there are shifts towards more time in your room with the door closed. Once you hit adolescence, that's totally normal. It can feel very hard as a parent. That's typical. But if we are seeing things that for your specific child is causing alarm in terms of much more irritable than usual, or spending a lot more time, looking at themselves in the mirror when it comes to the body image piece of things, or criticizing themselves, pulling back from things that used to light them up, any shifts like that, we would want to pay closer attention to.
Do boys handle it differently than girls in that case? Like, are we looking for the same signs or gender-wise? I hate to stereotype, but is it ever different?
Yeah, I think there are some things that can broad brushstrokes generally be true about girls versus boys. But again, if we bring it down to an individual level, that all kind of crumbles for us. But girls may be more likely to talk about this with their peers, with their friends. Boys may keep it a little bit more internal and have other ways of sort of expressing it, and that could be like competitively or athletically, although there are plenty of girls who evidence it in that way as well. Sometimes, and again, this really depends on the child, the friend group, the personality. Sometimes girls are more able to talk about these things with their peers, which can be helpful, but can also create swirls that kind of keeps this conversation going.
And before I let you go, one last question. If we start to notice self-harm, or we start to see, and it might not be physical, it might be talking, I don't know. What do we do? Like, what is that first step if we think that our child is participating in risky behavior or harmful behavior?
Yeah. So if your child is in distress, self-harm, risky behavior, any of those, we want to start by first talking with them, right? Like, I'm noticing this. I want to understand what's going on. Can you help me understand a little bit better? Depending on the school, depending on the child's age, you may be checking in at school. Like it's with a younger student, you have a more probably relationship with their teacher. You can be checking in with them or a school counselor. And if it feels like your child needs more support, if you're seeing this continued distress or behavior that is very concerning, then we are seeking some outside help. That could be a school counselor, it could be a therapist, it could be talking with your pediatrician to get some more information about what your child may need.
Great information. Dr. Tori Cordiano, thank you so much for your time today. We could go on and on. We're going to have you back. I appreciate it. This was really great.
Thank you, Maureen.
And thanks to all of you for watching Parenting Playbook with Maureen Kyle here on Fox 8 CLE Plus. All of our episodes are streaming now. You can catch all of it, all of the parenting advice. We're creating this playbook for you. And make sure you tune in next week for another great episode.